Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Conservative Corner. I'm Elliot Margolis, and I'm here with a special guest today, Ms. Avi Chomsky, from a professor of history at Salem State. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for inviting me.
And we're going to talk about the Middle East and what's going on in the Middle East. I just want to read the Balfour Declaration because I think that's a significant part of this. And the Balfour Declaration, which was in 1920, from Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So, with that in mind, let's talk about what's going on in Israel now. We can go back to 48 if you want, but you start.
Okay, well, can I start by contextualizing the Balfour Declaration?
You can do whatever you want.
I'm a historian, so you're going to have to drag me to the present. No, I love to talk about the present too, but I do feel like the history is really important. I'd like to talk about the context of the Balfour Declaration, because clearly, why is Britain deciding what's going to happen in Palestine? That's the sort of the first question we have to answer, which is, so we need to think about the European context, because Zionism comes out of a European context. The European Jewish movement to establish a national homeland in Palestine comes out of a European context, and Britain's control of Palestine obviously comes out of a European context too. So Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire for many centuries, and during World War I, Britain and France defeated the Ottoman Empire, and in the northern territories of the Ottoman Empire, they followed the idea of self-determination, that the people living there in places like Bulgaria should have the right to national self-determination, whereas in the Middle Eastern territories of the Ottoman Empire, the British and the French thought, well, those people don't know how to govern themselves, so we're going to take care of them. So that's part of the context of the Balfour Declaration coming out, that Britain and France basically recolonize areas of the Middle East that are taken from the Ottoman Empire after World War I. The other European context that's really important to understand is with the rise of nation states in Europe in the 1700s, 1800s, into the 1900s, and the aftermath of World War I is part of the rise of nation states in Europe. We think of the borders of the European countries as being something long-standing, but actually they're sort of, in the big historical picture, kind of recent historical creations, that part of the formation of nation states in Europe was this attempt to define, well, what is the nation? Who belongs and who doesn't belong? And that meant it was very much a Christian nation-state movement in Europe, as it was in the United States, although the United States, and there were religious wars in Europe, there were Catholic versus Protestant, but Jews were sort of the perpetual outsiders. There were Jews all over Europe, but as the nation states were formed, they were considered to be not really whatever the new nation state was trying to define itself as. So rising anti-Semitism in Europe, culminating, or not culminating, but reaching a peak in the 1930s in Germany, obviously, with the rise of Nazism. But the rise of Nazism was only part of a much longer history of anti-Semitism, and the emergence in the late 1800s of a Jewish national movement, primarily in Russia, Eastern European territories, but also in other parts of Europe, saying that Jews will never be at home in Europe, so we have to find another place where we too can have a nation state. and setting their sights on Palestine. So that's just a little background to the Balfour Declaration that I would like to give.
Okay, well, but we have to keep in mind too, allegedly, and nobody can prove it obviously, but 3000 BCE, God said to Abraham, this is going to be your land. And when you go through history, the Jews have been in the Middle East since then. They've been exiled a number of times. They've been killed a number of times. They've been slaves a number of times. They've had a pretty rough existence in the Middle East, but always, quote unquote, the promised land.
Okay, so a couple of things about that. Every nation state creates a mythology of why its people belong in this place. Usually that's done in the context of people who are in the present actually in the place. So in the creation of France as a nation state, or Germany, and the many years of conflict over, well, where should the borders of Germany be? Who's really German and who's not German? What should the borders be? That's a long-standing conflict as well. And to sort of justify the realities that political leaders want to create, they do what Eric Hobsbawm, historian of the 19th century, called, they invent tradition. So that's not unique to Zionism. It's true of every single nation state on the planet. They invent traditions. Just like in the United States, we invented the first Thanksgiving, right?
Right.
So these invented traditions, if you're looking at history from the last couple of hundred years, there's lots of sources that we can document how these things, but if you're going to go back thousands and thousands of years, there's very little written record. But let me say, yes, there have been Jews in Palestine for many centuries, we know that, and there have also been Jews almost everywhere in the world for many centuries. So I do not grant your point of God giving anybody anything, right, because that's too easy. Anybody can say, God told me to do it. So I don't think historians don't usually get involved in those debates about what God might have said. But if we're talking about where have Jews been throughout history, we can document Jewish presence practically everywhere in the world for many centuries.
Let's go to 1948.
Okay.
Or actually 47, when the British actually said, you can have this homeland, but they said, we have a plan for a two-state solution. The Jews approved the two-state solution. The Arabs did not.
So let's revise that just a little bit. So a couple of things happened during World War II. One is that many, many Jews are displaced. Those who survived the Holocaust are displaced. So there's this very large displaced Jewish population in Europe. Most of them want to go to the United States, but the United States won't take them. That is starting with restrictive immigration laws. Just as the peaks of anti-Semitism were coming about in Europe in the 1920s and 1930s, the United States closes the doors. So a lot of options for Jewish people in Europe and in the United States are closed off. So this contributes to a great growth in Zionism, which was really a very marginal movement prior to the rise of Nazism and the Holocaust. So the great powers, the victors in World War II, all say, well, we don't want those Jews, so let's foist them off on somebody else. That's basically the attitude of Roosevelt, of Truman, of the British authorities. The British are still in control of Palestine and other parts of the Middle East, as are the French. And there's very strong Arab nationalist movements calling for independence everywhere in the Middle East. Meanwhile, during the 1930s and especially during the 1940s, there's this huge, and especially after the end of World War II, there's a huge influx of Jewish immigration into Palestine. And the Jewish national movement has, from its very founding days, claimed the right to all of Palestine. It wasn't the British who declared partition, it was the United Nations. created the partition plan. And, I just want to go back to the Balfour Declaration for a second. I know, historian, that the Balfour Declaration acknowledged the existence of people in Palestine, but it didn't acknowledge the existence of their only rights were civil and religious rights, no national rights. So this is in the period where really the great powers, including Britain, didn't believe that any people of color had national rights. They were all supposed to be colonized. So this idea that European Jews have national rights, but the Palestinian Arab population does not have national rights, has been really deeply embedded in the League of Nations, the United Nations at the time, and the great powers that have basically controlled much of the fate of the Middle East. So during the late years of the British Mandate, the British really fostered the growth of the Zionist movement and the arming of the Zionist movement and the creation of a Jewish state apparatus, while at the same time brutally suppressing any Palestinian moves to create their own claims to the land and state apparatus. So there was a huge Palestinian uprising during the 1930s that lasted for several years, where the British collaborated with the Zionists to create basically a militarized state aimed at repressing the Palestinian population and any national aspirations on the part of the Palestinians. So the United Nations votes the partition plan at the end of 1947, and the Jewish state apparatus is ready. Before the State of Israel is even declared, there is a massive attack on Palestinian villages, Palestinian cities, the beginnings of what Palestinians refer to as the Nakba, the effort to depopulate Palestine, to clear all of Palestine of its population. And over the course of 1947, well before the declaration of the Israeli state in May of 1948, so it's those months between November of 47, when the partition is declared, and May of 48, there's a huge military displacement going on, what Israeli historian Ilan Pappé and many others have called the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, the attempt to remove the Palestinian population. And by the end of 1948, about 750,000 Palestinians have been displaced.
Well, but see, they had the opportunity in 47 to accept a two-state solution.
Not really. There was no two-state solution.
Well, the
Israelis never allowed the two-state solution.
The Israelis approved the two-state solution.
Well, yes, but then they proceeded to move to militarily attack and ethnically cleanse all of Palestine that they could get control of, well before any Arab armies entered Israel to try to protect the Palestinian population, which did not happen until many months into the ethnic cleansing and displacement of the Palestinians. So the forced removal of close to 1 million Palestinians, well over half of the population, how could those people form a state when they were under relentless attack and their villages were being burned and they were being murdered and assassinated and driven out of their homes? There was no way they could have accepted. There was no state for them to accept. But they were struggling to even survive.
There was a two-state solution.
No, there was never a Palestinian state.
According to the UN, there was a two-state solution.
But the Israelis did not allow it to be implemented because they immediately started attacking and displacing the Palestinian population.
The research,
I told you I was going to interrupt you.
That's all right, but the research that I've done suggests that Egypt, Jordan, and of course the Palestinians, as soon as Israel claimed, or Ben-Gurion claimed the state of Israel, they attacked Israel.
Okay, but
if they attacked Israel,
you're putting things in the wrong order. That is, the forced displacement and ethnic cleansing and removal of the Palestinian population started way before that. It started in 1947. You have to look at what happens between the declaration, you have to look at what happens during the entire period of British control, where they are arming the Zionists and teaching them and creating prisons and prison camps and teaching them how to destroy and remove and repress the Palestinian population. So, and you have to look at what happens between 1947 and 1948, where this massive ethnic cleansing is going on. All that happens before there was any Arab involvement of any other Arab state.
And years prior to that, there was a massive attempt to displace Jews in the Middle East. And there was many Jews, many thousands of Jews were killed.
Mostly in Europe. That is, the displacement of Jews and the killing of not thousands, but millions of Jews happened in Europe, not in the Middle East.
Let's move on a little bit, because we could fight this one a long time.
But you really need to read about what happened in 1947 and 1948 to understand the sequence of events.
I have read a lot of that stuff. I actually did a lot of reading on it, and I'm not denying what you say is true. All I'm saying is that's not what I read. I did read there was conflicts, but But
there were conflicts between an unarmed civilian Palestinian population and a heavily armed, backed by the British, Israeli.
Had they accepted the two-state solution, things could have been different.
But who could have accepted the two-state solution when they're under assault by the Israelis? They're fleeing for their lives. What do you mean, had they accepted the two-state solution?
Well, the British were still in control at the time.
The British pretty much gave up control. But when the British were in control, they were supporting the Zionist movement and militarily attacking the Palestinians. So when the British were in control, that's how the Israeli state was formed, when the British were in control. And that's how the Palestinian attempts to form a state.
The British left in 1947.
Mm-hmm. And that's when the Israelis, trained and armed by the British, and went full-fledged assault against the Palestinian population. Anyway, you want to go ahead in time.
There's no question, for thousands of years there's been conflict in the Middle East. There's no question.
I disagree.
I hope we agree on something. But
the current conflict has nothing. I mean, of course, there's been conflicts everywhere in the world. As long as we have human history, there's been conflicts. But the current conflict has nothing to do with a conflict that happened 5,000 years ago. It's about what happened basically when the Zionist movement and the British decided that there was going to be a Jewish state in Palestine.
We have had a number of opportunities to have a two-state solution.
Israel and the United States have never supported a two-state solution.
The United States supports it now.
They do not. They support something, but it's not a two-state solution. You have to look very carefully when the United States speaks, because the United States talks about some kind of Palestinian entity. We can call it a state, but it won't control its borders, and it has to be demilitarized. And so what they mean is not a state.
Think of it this way. Israel has been attacked by Hamas almost every month. Hamas lobs bombs into Israel indiscriminately.
And how many times has Israel invaded Gaza in the last 15 years? How many Gazans has Israel killed in the last 15 years?
And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to suggest that that's irrelevant, and I'll tell you why. Okay, if you are attacked, you have to fight back. You can't say,
And that's exactly why the Palestinians are fighting back.
So the Israelis, when they're attacked by indiscriminate bombs killing civilians, okay, they fight back.
And what about Palestinians? Do they fight back when they're attacked by indiscriminate bombs killing civilians?
Israel doesn't send indiscriminate bombs into Palestine.
Even Joe Biden, the biggest supporter of Israel, said that Israel's bombing is indiscriminate in Gaza. How did they kill 35,000 people if it's not through indiscriminate bombing? How did they destroy every university, every school, every hospital?
Okay, Israel, the IDF, is the only military force in the world that will drop leaflets to say, we're going to come in, all citizens leave.
And where are the citizens supposed to go?
Well, now that's an interesting question.
And how would you feel if somebody dropped a leaflet on your house saying, you have to leave?
why is it that Egypt...
When you'd already been displaced 2 or 3 times before that by that very same army pushing you out of your home.
Why is it that Egypt won't accept the Palestinians, Jordan won't accept the Palestinians, and then Hamas
Palestinians are the
will
majority
use
of
the
the population.
Palestinians as shields?
Palestinians are the majority of the population in Jordan. There's Palestinians all over the Middle East.
But
There's Palestinians in every country in the Middle East.
I understand that.
So
but,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Well,
Jordan,
Egypt closed this when Israel dropped the leaflets. Egypt closed its borders to the Palestinians. When
who controls the border between?
Now, keep in mind,
who controls the border, every single border of Gaza? Who?
Well, Israel does.
Israel does. Okay,
right.
So stop talking about Egypt.
But Israel has withdrawn from Gaza.
Who controlled all of the borders of Gaza, land, sea, and air, after Israel withdrew? Israel.
Israel controls the borders because that's, for protection for themselves.
Okay, so anybody can say that, but nevertheless, the fact is that Israel has controlled the borders since 1967.
But Egypt is the country that said, no, you can't come in here. And it is Hamas that has pretty much told the civilians they've got to stay here for their protection. So one could argue, and I'll argue it.
Okay, and I'll argue back.
That Hamas is responsible for the deaths of most of the Palestinians. Israel had smart bombs going into certain areas. Biden all of a sudden decided, gee, I don't think I'm going to send you any more smart bombs.
Actually, those were the stupid bombs, the 2,000-pound ones that he decided not to send any more of.
No, they were the smart bombs. They were the ones that could be directed. And, that's a real problem. Israel is very careful about civilian population.
And that's how they managed to kill 35,000 people in 6 months?
Well, like I said, Hamas uses them as protection. Why is it that Hamas teaches their 5-year-old kids to hate Jews and to kill Jews? How can
I don't know what you're talking about.
I've seen evidence of them teaching their kids to hate, and let's face it, hate
what
is
kind of
is
evidence
a learned,
exactly have you seen?
Filmed evidence. Hate is a learned thing. Nobody's born to hate anybody, and from my perspective, and I've said this on the show a number of times, it's time that we learned to accept people for who they are and not what they are. And I'll bet you can agree with that one.
Well, but that's not what Israel does. Israel accepts Jews for who they are and not what they are, but it does not accept Palestinians.
Okay.
And that's why one of the key Palestinian demands since 1948 has been the right of return. People who were expelled, people who were forcibly removed from their homes have the right to return to their homes. Israel says, no, you're not Jewish. We only let in Jews.
Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians work in Israel every day.
Not anymore, they don't.
Oh, yes, they do.
No, because the borders have completely been closed between the West Bank and Israel. All West Bank workers...
During wartime, maybe that's true. But I was in Israel a few years ago, and I went to some Arabs, and I said, why do you live in Israel if you hate the Jews? And their response was, we don't hate Jews, okay? But the living conditions in Israel are a lot better than they are in the other countries.
Okay, so you're talking about a couple of different things here.
Here's my question first, okay?
There's a big difference between Palestinians who live in Israel and Palestinians who live in the West Bank, okay? Palestinians who live in Israel are actually citizens of Israel. They're second-class citizens, but they're still citizens.
I don't know how you define second-class citizens, but...
People who do not have all the same rights as the other people.
They own homes, They own businesses.
They own homes
They work.
only in
They can be in the military if they want to be in the military.
They only own homes in very restricted areas because most of the land in Israel is reserved only for Jews, and Arabs cannot buy, they cannot build in those areas. Palestinian Israelis are extremely restricted under Israeli law. They're also restricted about what they can teach in school. They are not allowed to teach about the Nakba, about the displacement. If you look at the Nakba law that was passed in 2011, it's illegal for any Israeli school to teach the fact that people were displaced in 1947 and 1948. So Israelis are supposed to grow up not knowing that.
Well, from again, the research that I've done, number one, the education of the Palestinians. They have a higher percentage of literacy of Palestinians than Americans have in this country. A very high percentage. 97% of the Palestinians own cell phones. The money that the United States and other countries give to the Palestinians is used to buy bombs instead of developing, say, oil fields off the Mediterranean.
They're not allowed to.
Billions
Israel
and billions
controls
of
those oil fields.
Of barrels.
Gazan fishermen are not allowed to go more than 5 kilometers from the border. Israel completely controls all of those oil fields. But just to rewind for a moment.
If Israel controlled them,
it's
Israel
who uses all of, well, first of all, the United States doesn't give any money to the Palestinians. The money that the United States gives to Israel, which is the largest recipient of U.S. military aid in the world, that's what goes to buy bombs. And that's how they're able to kill so many people.
Well, you're right, Israel buys bombs. But Israel is one of the most developed countries in the world since 1948.
Yep.
The Palestinians are not.
Yep, that's because they don't have a country.
The Palestinians have natural gas.
No, the Israelis control that natural gas. That's why
Gaza.
Israel.
If the Gazans wanted to, Hamas, who controls Gaza, and Fatah, who controls the West Bank.
Israel controls Gaza and the West Bank, and there is absolutely no way that any government in Gaza can develop those gas fields because Israel controls them. Israel will not allow anyone from Gaza to go more than 5 kilometers. Israel controls everything that goes into Gaza. So it will not allow materials to do anything. Gaza has been systematically de-developed under Israeli control.
Okay, well, we have no time left, but I respectfully disagree with you, and I'd like to continue this at another time when both of us can meet. So we've got a lot to talk about.
I'm going to send you a reading list for that before that.
Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.